Looking back now, I realize there were signs all along that something wasn't right with my family. But when you're raised to believe that family comes first, you tend to overlook the red flags waving right in front of your face. My name is Rachel Morgan, and I'm 32 years old, living in Charlotte, North Carolina, where the summers are humid and the winters mild, nothing like the harsh cold I remember from visiting relatives up north. I've spent most of my adult life trying to be the daughter my parents wanted me to be, the reliable one, the responsible one, the one who never complained when things didn't go her way. Growing up in a middle-class neighborhood just outside the city, I watched my younger sister Lily receive everything she ever asked for while I learned to make do with hand-me-downs and borrowed dreams. Dance lessons for Lily meant working extra shifts at the grocery store for me during high school. Private tutoring for Lily meant I had to figure out calculus on my own with library books and YouTube videos. But I told myself this was normal, that maybe I was just being sensitive, that parents don't always treat their children exactly the same, and that was okay. The phone call that changed everything came on a Tuesday evening in early March. I had just gotten home from my job at the marketing firm downtown, exhausted from a presentation that had gone on far too long when my mother's number flashed on my screen. I almost didn't answer, knowing she usually called to ask me to do something for Lily or to remind me of some family obligation I'd rather skip, but something made me pick up that night. "Sweetheart, I need you to sit down." My mother's voice was shaky, filled with what sounded like genuine distress. "It's about Nana. She's been taken to the hospital and the doctors say it's serious. We need someone to stay with her to make sure she's getting the best care possible. Your father and I, well, we just can't handle seeing her like this. You know how close they've always been." My heart dropped into my stomach. Nana, my paternal grandmother, was 83 years old and had been the one constant source of unconditional love in my life. When my parents were too busy fawning over Lily's latest achievement, Nana was there to celebrate my small victories. When I graduated from college with honours, working 2 jobs to pay for it all, Nana was the loudest voice in the crowd. The thought of her lying in a hospital bed, alone and scared, was more than I could bear. "Of course I'll go," I said without hesitation, already mentally cancelling the plans I'd made for the next few days. "But Mum, what about the family trip? We've been planning this Caribbean cruise for over a year. Isn't it supposed to leave this weekend?" There was a pause on the other end of the line, just long enough for me to wonder if the connection had been lost. Then my mother sighed, a heavy sound that seemed to carry the weight of the world. "Oh, honey, the cruise doesn't matter right now. Family health comes first. Your father and I have already decided to cancel our tickets. Lily's devastated, of course, but she understands. We'll all stay here and take shifts at the hospital. You're so good with Nana, though. She always asks for you first. Could you go tonight?" Something in her voice should have tipped me off, some false note in the symphony of concern she was playing, but I was too worried about Nana to notice. I threw some clothes in an overnight bag, grabbed my laptop so I could work remotely if needed, and headed for Mercy General Hospital, the same place where Nana had her hip replacement 2 years ago. The drive usually took 45 minutes, but I made it in 30, my mind racing with worst-case scenarios. Had she fallen? Had her heart finally given out after years of medication and careful monitoring? I remembered our last conversation just 3 days ago when she'd called to tell me about the new mystery novel she was reading and how the butler definitely didn't do it this time. But when I arrived at Mercy General and asked for Dorothy Morgan's room, the nurse at the reception desk looked at me with confusion. "I'm sorry, but we don't have anyone by that name admitted here. Could she be under a different name? Maybe she came through the emergency room." I spent the next hour going from department to department, checking every possible variation of Nana's name, even calling other hospitals in the area in case my mother had been confused in her panic. But there was no trace of my grandmother anywhere. Finally, my hands shaking, I called Nana's house directly, praying she wouldn't answer, hoping this was all just a terrible mix-up. "Hello?" Nana's voice was clear and strong, not at all like someone who should be in the hospital. "Nana?" I could barely get the word out. "You're okay? You're at home?" "Well, of course I'm at home, dear. Where else would I be at 8 o'clock on a Tuesday night?" I'm watching that British baking show you recommended. These people put far too much faith in their custard, if you ask me. I sat down hard on a bench outside the hospital, my legs suddenly unable to hold me up. Nana, Mum called me. She said you were in the hospital, that it was serious. I've been here for an hour trying to find you. The silence on the other end of the line stretched out for so long, I wondered if she'd hung up. When she finally spoke, her voice had lost all its warmth. Rachel, where are your parents right now? I don't know. Home, I guess. They said they were too upset to come to the hospital, that they'd cancelled their cruise tickets because of your health scare. Another long pause. Sweetheart, I think you'd better come over here. There's something you need to know. The drive to Nana's house felt surreal, like I was moving through a dream where nothing quite made sense. The familiar streets of her neighbourhood, with their towering oak trees and well-maintained lawns, seemed foreign somehow. When I pulled into her driveway, she was already standing at the door, backlit by the warm glow from her living room. She pulled me into a hug the moment I reached her, and I breathed in the familiar scent of her lavender perfume, mixed with the faint aroma of whatever she'd baked that afternoon. Probably those snickerdoodle cookies she knew were my favourite. Inside, she led me to the kitchen, her domain, where serious conversations always seemed to happen over cups of tea and homemade treats. Your mother called me last week, she began, pouring hot water over tea bags in 2 delicate china cups that had belonged to her mother. She asked me to lie for her, said if you showed up at my door asking about my health, I should play along, pretend I'd been in the hospital but was feeling better. I refused, of course, and I told her exactly what I thought of her scheme. The room seemed to spin slightly as I processed this information, but why? Why would they do this? Nana pulled out her phone, something she'd only recently learned to use properly, and showed me a Facebook post from my cousin Jessica. It was dated just 2 hours ago, showing a group photo on what was clearly the deck of a cruise ship. There were my parents raising champagne glasses. There was Lily in a designer sundress I'd never seen before. There were my aunts and uncles, my cousins, even family friends I'd known since childhood. Everyone except me. The caption read, "Setting sail on the adventure of a lifetime. So grateful to be surrounded by family as we explore the Caribbean together. 7 days of paradise ahead." I stared at the photo, counting faces, recognizing each smile, each person who had been part of my life for as long as I could remember. They hadn't cancelled anything. They'd simply found a way to leave without me, using my love for Nana as a weapon against me. 28 people, Nana said quietly, reading my mind as she often did. That's how many family members are on that ship right now. You're the only one they excluded. The only one they lied to. The tears came then, hot and angry, rolling down my cheeks faster than I could wipe them away. All those months of planning, all those group texts about shore excursions and dinner reservations. All those times they'd assured me we'd all be together for once. And they'd thrown it away, thrown me away, as easily as yesterday's newspaper. But why? I asked again, my voice breaking on the simple question that held so much pain. Nana reached across the table and took my hands in hers. Her skin was soft and papery, marked with age spots that told the story of a life well lived, but her grip was firm. Because they've been doing this to you your whole life, sweetheart, making you feel less than, pushing you aside for Lily, taking what's yours and giving it to her. But this time they went too far. She stood up and walked to the antique secretary desk in the corner of the kitchen, returning with a manila folder thick with papers. I've been keeping track, she said, laying it open in front of me. Every time they've wronged you, every dollar they've spent differently between you and your sister, every lie they've told, it's all here. I flipped through the pages, my hands trembling. There were receipts for Lily's dance lessons, the ones my parents said they couldn't afford for me. Bank statements showing deposits into Lily's college fund while mine remained empty. Photos from family events I hadn't even known about, gatherings I'd been told were cancelled or rescheduled. The evidence of a lifetime of deliberate exclusion and favouritism laid out in black and white. But there's more, Nana continued, her voice taking on an edge I'd never heard before. Something they don't know I know. Something about your grandfather's will and what was supposed to be yours. My grandfather had died when I was 7, leaving behind a successful construction business and a considerable fortune. I'd always been told the money was tied up in trusts, that it would be distributed when the time was right, but I'd never pressed for details. Money had never been what mattered to me. Family had. What a fool I'd been. Nana produced another document, this one bearing the official seal of a law firm. Your grandfather left very specific instructions. The money was to be divided equally among his grandchildren when each turned 30. You're 32 now, Rachel. You should have received your share 2 years ago. I scanned the document, trying to make sense of the legal language. The trust was worth how much? I gasped, seeing the figure. $4.2 million to be split between you and Lily. But here's the thing, sweetheart. Your parents have had access to your portion for the past 2 years. They were supposed to notify you, to transfer your share, but they didn't. They've been spending it instead. The room spun again, and I gripped the edge of the table to steady myself. That explains the new house, I whispered, thinking of my parents' sudden move to a gated community last year. And Lily's wedding. Lily's wedding had been a lavish affair 6 months ago, with 300 guests, a destination bachelor and bachelorette party, and a dress that cost more than my car. I'd been a bridesmaid, of course, spending money I didn't have on a dress I'd never wear again, smiling through the pain of watching my parents spare no expense for their golden child, while I'd eloped at City Hall because I couldn't afford anything more. And the cruise, Nana added. I did some digging. They booked the grand suites, the ones with private balconies and butler service. $28,000 just for the accommodations, not counting excursions and extras. All paid for with money that should have been yours. I stood up, needing to move, needing to do something with the rage that was building inside me. How do you know all this? Because I hired a private investigator, Nana said simply. The moment your mother asked me to lie about being sick, I knew something bigger was going on. Harold Worthington, best in the business. He found out things even I wasn't prepared for. She pulled out a tablet, another recent acquisition, and showed me a series of bank statements. Your parents have been moving money to offshore accounts. They're planning something, Rachel. This cruise isn't just a vacation, it's a test run. They're seeing how easy it will be to leave the country, to disappear with what's left of your inheritance. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. The sudden interest in international travel, the way my mother had been asking about my work schedule for the next few months, even Lily's cryptic comments about big changes coming. They were planning to run, to take everything and leave me behind in more ways than one. We need to stop them, I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. Already in motion, dear. I've contacted the executor of your grandfather's estate, my nephew Robert. He's horrified by what's happened and has agreed to freeze the remaining funds. I've also spoken with the district attorney's office. What your parents have done isn't just morally wrong, it's criminal. Embezzlement, fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, the list goes on. I sank back into my chair, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what was happening. Nana, I don't want to destroy my family. She leaned forward, her eyes fierce behind her wire-rimmed glasses. They destroyed it first, Rachel. Every time they chose Lily over you, every time they lied to your face, every time they took what was rightfully yours and gave it to her. You're not destroying anything. You're finally standing up for yourself. And it's about damn time. We spent the rest of the night going through the evidence, making lists of what we knew and what we still needed to find out. Nana insisted I stay in my old room, the one she'd kept exactly as it was from my childhood visits, complete with the quilt she'd made for my 16th birthday that my parents had said was too childish for my room at home. I couldn't sleep, my mind racing with memories that took on new meaning in light of what I'd learned. The Christmas when I was 12 and found Lily playing with the art set I'd been promised, my parents explaining that Santa must have made a mistake. The scholarship I'd won to art camp that mysteriously disappeared, my parents saying the program had been cancelled while Lily went to horse camp instead. The college acceptance letters I'd never received, finding out years later that my parents had intercepted them, telling me the schools had rejected me when in fact I'd been accepted with partial scholarships to several. In the morning, I called in sick to work, knowing I needed time to process everything and figure out my next steps. Nana was already up, making breakfast and fielding calls from Robert and the private investigator. The cruise ship had left port the previous evening, but thanks to modern technology, we could track its progress and the social media posts that were already flooding in. Lily had posted a photo of her breakfast, a lavish spread that probably cost more than I spent on groceries in a week. "Living my best life," the caption read. "So blessed to have parents who make dreams come true." My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "Hope Nana is feeling better. We decided to go ahead with the cruise after all since you were with her. Didn't want the tickets to go to waste. Give her our love." The casualness of the lie made my stomach turn. I showed it to Nana, who snorted with disgust. "Save that," she advised. "Evidence of their deception. We're going to need it all." Robert arrived just after lunch, a tall, distinguished man in his 60s, who I'd only met a handful of times at family gatherings. He hugged me tightly, apologizing profusely for not catching the theft sooner. "I trusted your parents," he said, shaking his head. "Your grandfather trusted them. We never imagined they'd steal from their own daughter." He'd brought forensic accountants with him, serious-looking people in dark suits who set up laptops on Nana's dining room table and began the tedious work of tracking every penny. Within hours, they'd uncovered more than we'd expected. Not only had my parents taken my share of the trust, they'd been siphoning money from the family construction business, using my father's position as CFO to hide the theft. $2.1 million, one of the accountants announced. That's what's missing from Rachel's trust alone. Another $800,000 from the company accounts. And that's just what we've found so far. The numbers were staggering, impossible to fully comprehend. I'd been struggling to pay off student loans, driving a 10-year-old car, shopping at discount stores, while my parents had been living like royalty on money that was partially mine. The unfairness of it all threatened to overwhelm me, but Nana's steady presence kept me grounded. That evening, Harold, the private investigator, arrived with more bombshells. He was a small, unassuming man who looked more like an accountant than someone who dug up secrets for a living, but his findings were thorough and damaging. "Your sister has been helping them," he said, spreading photos across the coffee table. "She's been setting up shell companies, moving money through her business accounts. She's not just a beneficiary of their crimes, she's an active participant." Lily owned a boutique in the trendy part of town, one of those places that sold overpriced activewear to women who did yoga twice a year. I'd always wondered how she kept it afloat when I rarely saw customers inside. Now I knew it wasn't really a business at all, just a front for laundering stolen money. "There's more," Harold continued. "I've been in contact with some of the other passengers on the cruise. Your Aunt Patricia, specifically, she had no idea you weren't coming. Your parents told everyone you'd chosen to stay behind, that you'd gotten a promotion at work and couldn't take the time off. They made it sound like your choice. Of course they did. They'd always been master manipulators, spinning stories that made them look like the long-suffering parents of an ungrateful daughter. How many family members over the years had heard their version of events, believing I was cold, distant, too focused on my career to care about family? The truth was I'd never missed a family event by choice, only when I hadn't been invited or had been given the wrong information. My phone rang, and I was surprised to see my cousin Michael's name on the screen. He was on the cruise too, but we'd always been close, and I wondered if he'd started to piece together the truth. "Rachel, thank God," he said when I answered. "Something's not right here. Your mum just told Aunt Susan that you're in Europe on a business trip. But Jessica said she saw comments from you about Nana being sick. What's really going on?" I took a deep breath and told him everything. The lies about Nana, the stolen inheritance, the years of deception and favoritism. The silence on his end grew longer with each revelation, until I wondered if the call had dropped. Finally, he spoke, his voice shaking with anger. "Those bastards. Rachel, I'm so sorry. We all should have seen this, should have questioned why you were never around. They always had an excuse, and we just accepted it. Michael promised to quietly spread the word among the family members on the ship who could be trusted to gather evidence of my parents' lies. He also mentioned something that made my blood run cold. Your dad's been making comments about international banking laws, about how hard it is for the US government to freeze assets in certain countries. Rachel, I think they're planning to jump ship at one of the ports. They've been studying maps of the Cayman Islands, talking about real estate there. After I hung up, the team around Nana's dining room table sprang into action. Robert called his contacts at the FBI, explaining the situation and the flight risk my parents presented. The forensic accountants prepared emergency documentation to freeze all accessible accounts. Harold made calls to his contacts in the cruise industry, trying to find out if my parents had made any special arrangements at upcoming ports. By midnight, we had a plan. The FBI would have agents waiting at the next port of call in Jamaica. The cruise line had been notified and would cooperate fully. My parents' passports would be flagged, making it impossible for them to leave the ship without being detained. It was a race against time, but we had the advantage of surprise. They thought I was sitting at home, sad and excluded, but none the wiser to their true crimes. I should have felt guilty about what was about to happen to my parents, but all I felt was a cold sense of justice finally being served. They'd stolen more than money from me. They'd stolen opportunities, experiences, the chance to feel valued and loved unconditionally. They'd made me doubt my own worth, question whether I deserved the good things in life, and for what. So Lily could have another designer handbag, so they could pretend to be wealthier than they were. Nana made me go to bed, insisting I needed rest for what was coming. This time sleep came easier, perhaps because I finally knew the truth, finally understood that I wasn't crazy or too sensitive or imagining things. The favoritism had been real, calculated, and criminal. I woke to my phone buzzing insistently. Lily was calling, which was unusual since she rarely contacted me directly. Against my better judgment, I answered, "This is..." "What have you done?" she shrieked, her voice so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear. "Mom and Dad just got arrested in Jamaica, in front of everyone. Do you have any idea how humiliating this is?" I sat up, suddenly wide awake. They'd been arrested. The plan had worked. What I've done? Lily, they stole over $2 million from me. They've been living off my inheritance while I've been struggling to make ends meet. What did you think was going to happen when the truth came out? That money was for the family, she spat, for our future. You've always been selfish, Rachel, always wanting everything to be equal. Well, life isn't fair. Some of us deserve more than others. And there it was, the truth laid bare. She'd known all along what they were doing and had felt entitled to benefit from it. My sister, who I'd defended countless times, who I'd loved despite the obvious favoritism, thought she deserved my inheritance simply because she existed. You're right, Lily. Life isn't fair, but the law is, and what you and our parents did is illegal. I'd suggest you get a good lawyer. You're going to need one. This isn't over, she hissed. When we get back, we're going to fight this. We have connections, friends in high places. You're going to regret destroying your family over money. I thought about all the birthdays they'd forgotten, all the achievements they'd ignored, all the times I'd been made to feel less than. I'm not destroying my family, Lily. I'm finally acknowledging that I never really had one. At least not with you and our parents. Nana's my family. The people who actually care about me are my family. You're just criminals who happen to share my DNA. I hung up on her protests and walked downstairs to find Nana already awake, making coffee and smiling broadly. The FBI called, she announced. Your parents are in custody. They found documents in their cabin showing they were planning to disembark in the Cayman Islands and not return. Lily's been detained as well, pending investigation. The cruise line is cooperating fully and the other family members are being interviewed. I sank into a chair at the kitchen table, the same one where this had all started just 2 days ago. It felt like a lifetime had passed since then. Nana set a cup of coffee in front of me, prepared exactly how I liked it, something my parents had never bothered to learn despite living with me for 18 years. The next few days passed in a blur of legal meetings, paperwork, and revelations. The FBI investigation uncovered the full extent of my parents' crimes, which went back even further than we'd thought. They'd been skimming from my trust since I turned 18, telling the trustee they were using it for my education and living expenses while pocketing the money. They'd intercepted college acceptance letters, scholarship offers, even job opportunities that had come through family connections, all to keep me dependent and unaware of what I was owed. The family construction business was in shambles, with years of embezzlement having taken its toll. Robert worked tirelessly to salvage what he could, bringing in new management and forensic auditors to trace every missing penny. I was offered a position on the board of directors, which I accepted, determined to help rebuild what my parents had destroyed. The cruise ship returned to port early, the vacation ruined for everyone aboard. Some family members were understanding, appalled by what my parents had done and offering support. Others, those who had benefited from my parents' generosity over the years, were angry at me for rocking the boat. I found I didn't care about their opinions anymore. The people who mattered had shown their true colours, and I was better off knowing who really cared about me. My parents were formally charged with embezzlement, fraud, conspiracy, and a host of other financial crimes. The evidence was overwhelming, from the forensic accounting to the documents found in their cabin to Lily's recorded conversations where she admitted to knowing about the theft. They were looking at serious prison time, their assets frozen, their reputations destroyed. Lily tried to cut a deal, offering to testify against our parents in exchange for immunity, but the prosecutors had enough evidence without her cooperation, and she was charged as a co-conspirator. Her boutique was seized as proceeds of criminal activity, her social media accounts full of luxury goods and expensive vacations becoming evidence of her lifestyle funded by stolen money. The irony wasn't lost on me. The cruise they'd excluded me from had become their downfall, a floating prison that delivered them directly into the hands of justice. If they'd simply included me, if they'd treated me fairly just this once, they might have gotten away with their crimes. But their need to hurt me, to exclude me even from a family vacation, had been their undoing. Nana and I grew even closer through the ordeal. She moved in with me temporarily, saying her house felt too big and empty, but I knew she wanted to make sure I was okay. We spent evenings going through old photo albums, and she told me stories about my grandfather, about how he'd built his business from nothing, how proud he would have been of me for standing up for myself. "You know what the saddest part is?" she said one evening as we sat on my small balcony watching the sunset. I would have shared it with them. If they'd just been honest, if they'd told me about the inheritance and asked for help, I would have given it freely. I never cared about the money, I just wanted to be included, to be valued. Nana reached over and squeezed my hand. "That's what makes you different from them, sweetheart. You have a generous heart. They mistook your kindness for weakness, and that was their biggest mistake. The legal proceedings dragged on for months. There were depositions, hearings, plea negotiations that went nowhere because my parents insisted they'd done nothing wrong, that the money was family money, and they had every right to use it as they saw fit. Their lawyer, an old family friend who quickly distanced himself once he saw the evidence, advised them to plead guilty and hope for leniency. They refused, convinced they could talk their way out of trouble as they always had. During this time, I discovered something beautiful. Without the weight of their disapproval and constant comparisons to Lily, I began to flourish. I took art classes, something I'd always wanted to do but had been told was impractical. I made new friends who knew nothing about my family drama and liked me for who I was. I even started dating James, a fellow board member at the construction company, who admired how I'd handled the situation with grace and determination. The trial date approached, and with it, a final attempt at manipulation. My mother wrote me a letter delivered through her lawyer that was a masterpiece of guilt and emotional blackmail. She wrote about how she'd sacrificed everything for her children, how she'd only wanted the best for us, how I was destroying her health with the stress of the trial. She even claimed that keeping the inheritance from me had been for my own good, that I wasn't mature enough to handle that kind of money. I showed the letter to my therapist, Dr. Williams, who I'd started seeing to process the trauma of discovering my family's betrayal. "This is what we call gaslighting," she explained. "Even now, even with all the evidence against her, she's trying to make you question your own reality, to make you feel guilty for holding her accountable. It's a classic manipulation tactic, and the fact that you recognize it for what it is shows how far you've come." She was right. 6 months ago, that letter would have devastated me, would have had me second-guessing everything. Now I saw it for what it was, a desperate attempt to regain control by someone who had lost all power over me. I filed it with the other evidence, another piece of proof of their inability to take responsibility for their actions. The trial was a media sensation. Daughter sues parents for millions in stolen inheritance made for great headlines, and reporters camped outside the courthouse. I hadn't wanted the attention, but Robert convinced me that publicity could help. There might be other families out there dealing with similar situations, other children who'd been robbed by the people who were supposed to protect them. Maybe our story would give them the courage to seek justice. On the stand, my parents painted themselves as victims of a vindictive daughter who'd always been jealous of her sister. They claimed the money had been spent on family expenses, that I'd benefited from it indirectly. But the forensic accountant's testimony demolished their claims. Every dollar had been traced, and the vast majority had gone to Lily or to fund my parents' increasingly lavish lifestyle. Business-class flights, 5-star hotels, jewelry that my mother wore to court, seemingly oblivious to how it looked. Lily's testimony was perhaps the most painful to sit through. She took the stand in a conservative suit, trying to look like the innocent victim, but her true nature came through under cross-examination. She admitted to knowing about the trust, to helping set up the shell companies, to believing she deserved the money more because she was the favorite child. Her exact words, spoken with a sneer in my direction, sealed her fate with the jury. The verdict came back guilty on all counts. My parents were sentenced to 5 years in federal prison, with restitution ordered for the full amount stolen plus interest. Lily got 3 years, her lesser involvement earning her a lighter sentence. As they were led away in handcuffs, my mother looked at me with such hatred that I actually stepped back. But I didn't look away. I'd spent too many years avoiding confrontation, accepting less than I deserved. Not anymore. The aftermath was complicated. Some family relationships were irreparably damaged, cousins and aunts who couldn't understand how I could send my own parents to prison, but others grew stronger. Uncle Michael became a regular visitor, bringing his family for dinners where we never discussed the trial. Cousin Jessica started a support group for family members dealing with financial abuse. And Nana, my rock through it all, officially updated her will to leave everything to me, not out of spite, but because she knew I'd use it wisely. I used part of the recovered money to set up a scholarship fund at my old high school for students who, like me, were working multiple jobs to afford college. Another portion went to expanding Nana's favourite charity, a local food bank that had helped us during the lean years when I was putting myself through school. The rest I invested carefully, determined to be a good steward of the grandfather I barely remembered, but who had wanted to provide for my future. The family construction company, under new management and with my input on the board, began to thrive again. We implemented strict financial controls and transparency measures that should have been in place all along. I found I had a knack for business, something that might have been discovered earlier if I'd been given the same opportunities as Lily. But I tried not to dwell on what-ifs. The past was past, and I had a future to build. James and I grew closer, our relationship built on mutual respect and understanding. He'd met me at my lowest point and had admired how I'd handled it. He never tried to minimize what I'd been through or rush me to get over it and move on. When he proposed a year later, at the same spot where we'd had our first real conversation about family and trust and what it means to truly love someone, I said yes without hesitation. Our wedding was small, intimate, nothing like Lily's extravaganza. Nana walked me down the aisle, tears streaming down her face as she placed my hand in James's. My birth parents weren't there, of course, but I didn't feel their absence. The people who mattered were present, the family I'd chosen and who had chosen me in return. I visited my parents once in prison. I'm not sure what I expected, maybe some sign of remorse, some acknowledgement of the pain they'd caused. Instead, my mother spent the entire visit complaining about the conditions, the food, the other inmates. My father sat silently, his eyes fixed on a point somewhere over my shoulder. They seemed smaller somehow, diminished without their stolen wealth and social status. I left knowing I'd never visit again. Some relationships are too broken to repair, and that's okay. Not every story needs a reconciliation. Lily was released early for good behavior and immediately left the state. Last I heard, she was working as a receptionist in a dental office in Oregon, living a life far removed from the luxury she'd once taken for granted. She sent me a letter once, not an apology exactly, but an acknowledgement that things had gone too far. I didn't respond. Forgiveness is a personal journey, and I wasn't ready to take that step. Maybe someday, but not yet. Life settled into a new rhythm. Quiet dinners with Nana, where we talked about everything and nothing. Board meetings where my voice was heard and valued. Art classes where I discovered a talent for watercolors, painting landscapes that sold well at local galleries. Date nights with James, who still looked at me like I hung the moon. Normal, peaceful, drama-free life that I'd never known was possible. Sometimes I thought about that cruise, the one that had started it all. In a strange way, I was grateful for it. If they hadn't excluded me, if they hadn't told such an elaborate lie, I might have gone on for years not knowing the truth. I might have continued accepting scraps of affection, believing I deserved less than Lily, never discovering my own worth. Their cruelty had set me free. On the 2-year anniversary of what I'd come to think of as the phone call, Nana and I took our own cruise. Nothing as fancy as the one my family had taken, just a simple Caribbean voyage on a smaller ship. We sat on deck chairs, sipping fruity drinks with little umbrellas, watching the ocean roll by. "You know what I've learnt from all this?" I said, turning to look at the woman who'd saved me in more ways than one. Nana smiled, that knowing smile that said she probably already knew what I was going to say, but wanted to hear it anyway. "What's that, dear? That family isn't about blood. It's about who shows up when you need them. It's about truth and trust and unconditional love. You've been more of a mother to me than the woman who gave birth to me, and that's not sad. It's beautiful. We get to choose our family, and I choose you." She reached over and squeezed my hand, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "And I choose you right back, sweetheart. Every single day." The sun set over the water, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Somewhere out there, my parents were serving their time, paying for crimes that went deeper than money. Somewhere, Lily was living with the consequences of her choices. But here, on this ship, with the person who had shown me what real love looked like, I was exactly where I belonged. The next morning, I woke to find several messages on my phone. Old friends who'd heard about the trial reaching out, a colleague asking if I'd speak at a conference about financial abuse within families, an invitation to join a non-profit board focused on helping young adults escape toxic family situations. Each message was an opportunity to turn my pain into purpose, to help others who might be going through what I'd experienced. I accepted them all. If my story could help even one person recognize the signs of financial abuse, if it could give someone the courage to stand up for themselves, then everything I'd been through would have meaning. Nana liked to say that our greatest trials often became our greatest gifts, not because the pain was worth it, but because we could transform that pain into something powerful. The cruise ended too soon, as all good things do, but we returned home with hearts full and spirits renewed. There was work to be done, a company to help run, a non-profit to establish, a life to live fully and authentically. The girl who'd driven to a hospital on a Tuesday night, worried sick about a grandmother who wasn't even there, felt like a stranger to me now. I'd kept her kindness and compassion, but had shed her need for approval, her willingness to accept less than she deserved. James met us at the port, flowers in hand, and that smile that still made my heart skip. He'd planned a welcome home dinner with our chosen family, the people who'd stood by us through the trial and its aftermath. As I looked around the table that night, at faces filled with genuine love and acceptance, I realized this was what I'd been searching for all along. Not money or recognition or equality with a sister who'd never seen me as anything more than competition. Just this. People who saw me, valued me, loved me for exactly who I was. The investigation into my parents' crimes had revealed one final secret. There was another account, one they'd been planning to use for their escape, containing nearly $500,000. The FBI seized it, and after legal proceedings, it was returned to me. I could have kept it all, added it to my own accounts, used it to live an even more comfortable life. Instead, I did something that would have shocked my parents, but made perfect sense to anyone who really knew me. I created the Morgan Family Foundation, dedicated to helping victims of family financial abuse. We provided legal resources, counseling services, and emergency funds for those who'd been robbed by the people they trusted most. Nana served as honorary chair, her picture on our website with a quote that became our motto: "Family should lift you up, not tear you down. When they choose to harm instead of help, you have the right to seek justice." The foundation grew quickly, perhaps because there were more people like me than anyone wanted to admit. Adult children who'd discovered their college funds had been spent on siblings. Elderly parents whose life savings had been drained by entitled children. Spouses who'd been financially controlled and manipulated. We helped them all, no judgment, no questions about why they'd stayed so long or put up with so much. We understood that family bonds were complicated, that love and abuse could exist in the same space, that sometimes it took a catalyst like my cruise ship exclusion to finally see the truth. A year into the Foundation's work, I received a letter that stopped me cold. It was from a young woman named Sarah, whose situation mirrored mine so closely it was eerie. Her parents had faked a family emergency to exclude her from a reunion where they'd announced her younger brother would be taking over the family business, a business built with her inheritance from a grandmother. She'd seen a news article about my case and realized she wasn't alone, wasn't crazy for feeling betrayed. "Your story gave me permission to be angry," she wrote, "to stop making excuses for them, to stop believing I deserved less because I wasn't the favorite. I've started legal proceedings, and while my family calls me selfish and ungrateful, I keep reminding myself of what your grandmother said. Family should lift you up. Thank you for showing me it's okay to expect that." I framed that letter, hanging it in my office at the Foundation as a reminder of why we did this work. Every person we helped was a victory, not just against financial abuse, but against the culture of silence that allowed it to flourish. We were changing the conversation, making it acceptable to hold family members accountable for their crimes, to prioritize justice over a false peace that came at too high a price. 5 years after that fateful phone call, I stood before a congressional committee testifying about the need for stronger laws protecting family members from financial exploitation. I wore the same suit I'd worn to my parents' trial, a reminder of how far I'd come. Nana sat in the gallery, now 90, but still fierce, still my biggest supporter. James was there too, holding our 6-month-old daughter named Dorothy after the grandmother who had saved me. As I spoke about the prevalence of family financial abuse, about the unique challenges victims faced when their abusers shared their DNA, I thought about my parents. They'd been released from prison but had never attempted to contact me. Lily had reached out once, asking for a loan to start over, seemingly oblivious to the irony. I'd declined, but had given her information about job training programs, the same ones I'd used when I was putting myself through school. Whether she used them or not was up to her. I'd learned I could have boundaries without being cruel, could protect myself without seeking revenge. The committee listened intently, asked thoughtful questions, promised to consider legislation that would make it easier for victims to recover stolen assets and prosecute family members who exploited their positions of trust. It wasn't a guarantee, but it was progress. Change came slowly, but it came. After the hearing, a reporter asked me if I regretted what had happened to my family. I thought about it for a moment, choosing my words carefully. I regret that my parents chose greed over love, that they saw me as a resource to be exploited rather than a daughter to be cherished. But I don't regret standing up for myself. I don't regret seeking justice. And I certainly don't regret the life I've built from the ashes of their betrayal. Sometimes the family you're born into isn't the one you're meant to keep. Sometimes you have to create your own. That night, we celebrated quietly at home. Nana cooked her famous pot roast, the one she'd made for every important occasion in my life. James made a toast to strong women and the men smart enough to love them. Baby Dorothy gurgled happily in her high chair, blissfully unaware of the complicated history that had led to her existence. She would grow up differently than I had, surrounded by people who celebrated her achievements, who valued her for who she was, who would never make her feel less than. As I looked around my dining room table at the faces of my chosen family, I felt a peace I'd never known in my childhood home. This was what love looked like, not perfect, not without its challenges, but real and honest and unconditional. The cruise ship my birth family had sailed away on without me had actually been carrying me toward this moment, toward this life, toward this joy I'd never dared to imagine was possible. My phone buzzed with a notification. Another message to the foundation, another person seeking help, another opportunity to turn pain into purpose. Tomorrow I would read it, would offer what assistance I could, would continue the work of breaking cycles and healing wounds. But tonight, I was just a woman surrounded by love, grateful for a grandmother who'd refused to lie, for a betrayal that had become a blessing, for the discovery that sometimes the best families are the ones we build ourselves. The grandfather I barely remembered had left me an inheritance, but it wasn't really about the money. It was about what that money represented: possibility, freedom, the chance to become who I was meant to be. My parents had tried to steal that from me, had nearly succeeded. But in the end, their greed had given me something far more valuable than any trust fund. It had given me the truth. And with that truth had come the power to rewrite my story, to choose my own ending, to create a life filled with the love and respect I'd always deserved. As Nana liked to say, living well was the best revenge. But it wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about living, period. Fully, authentically, joyfully. The girl who'd driven to that hospital, heart full of worry for a grandmother who wasn't even sick, would always be part of me. But she was no longer all of me. I'd become so much more: advocate, wife, mother, survivor. Most importantly, I'd become myself, finally and fully, no longer defined by my family's rejection, but by my own choices, my own values, my own worth. The cruise they'd taken without me had been meant to leave me behind. Instead, it had set me free. And for that unexpected gift, despite all the pain it had caused, I was finally, genuinely grateful. Not for their cruelty, but for where it had led me. Not for their lies, but for the truth they'd revealed. Not for the family I'd lost, but for the one I'd found. Outside, the Charlotte sky was clear, stars visible despite the city lights. Somewhere under those same stars, my parents and sister were living with the consequences of their choices. But here, in this house filled with laughter and love, I was living with the consequences of mine. And those consequences, it turned out, were beautiful beyond measure.